There's big questions about Kenny Pickett and what will happen with the concussion protocol. It's his second time being in the concussion protocol, but we're going to explain all the details of that and what we know as far as how the Steelers should approach it, how they might approach it, and talk about that. Also, it's grades day. We're going to go back over that debacle of a Ravens game and go over stars and skulls right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Joining me today is Wes Uhler, Steeler Nation Radio. It's going to be a fun episode. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button in the video if you enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Simply Safe. Simply Safe is home security 24/7 with Fast Protect technology exclusively from Simply Safe. They give you 24/7 home monitoring agents that capture evidence to accurately verify a threat for faster police response. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Visit simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more. As I said before, we've got Wes Uhler back on the show from Steeler Nation Radio. I was just on with him and Arthur Moats on Monday. You can also check him out on all the different podcasts he does on the West Virginia Mountaineers. Wes, how you doing?
CC, I am always happy to have time to catch up with you. Like Chick-fil-A, it's my pleasure every time we get together here, and I'm excited to jump into what I can only imagine are not the best grades. I have a feeling we have more skulls than stars, and certainly plenty to talk about with you here this week.
Absolutely, and we'll get into that in a minute, but I want to lead off with what we know about Kenny Pickett's concussion situation. Now, again, it's always the tricky thing of where was someone actually concussed? Are they in the concussion protocol? There is a difference from that. It's not the same how it used to be. If there's a chance that you might have a concussion or you're experiencing concussion-like symptoms, you are in the concussion protocol. It does seem odd about the situation about how the Steelers put Kenny Pickett back out there, and then he went back in. There were some interesting explanations for that, talking about how, they didn't see the symptoms because he was in the blue tent for about several minutes, maybe like 8 minutes or so, as the Steelers defense was on the field. And then when he came back out, he put his helmet right back on and started warming up. There's no doubt in my mind that the Steelers did the tests, but then what probably happened was part of the symptoms that we talk about are just notes from the player. Like, do I feel dizzy? How do I feel when I'm running around? Do things seem like different things that just go along? And it seemed like those symptoms arose when he tried to play again. And that's why the Steelers pulled him right back out. It was weird, Wes, but I think it's best that the Steelers did pull him and protect him. And thank goodness he didn't take another ridiculous hit to the head.
It is weird, but I don't think it should be surprising. Listen, right. Chris, I think the thing we know most about concussions, or at least you should know most about concussions, is there's no exact science to this.
Agreed.
Right? Sometimes you hear people say, oh, it's just a mild concussion. Well, that's like saying you're just a little bit pregnant. A concussion is a concussion, and it's not like you tore your hamstring and right away the symptoms are there. And the timeline for recovery and all these different things. Sometimes a concussion, it can take you till the next day till you really feel it. It can take you till a few hours later. It can take you till a few minutes, maybe like Kenny Pickett. The one thing sports fans in Pittsburgh should know about concussions is that they're unpredictable.
Yeah.
I mean, didn't we see that for 2 years with Sidney Crosby?
That's exactly where I was going.
A decade ago. Now, he had 2 concussions in the span of a week, so that's obviously the same church but clearly a different pew. But yeah, Listen, I know, especially, too, in light of what happened with Tua Tagovailoa this season, a lot of people are hypersensitive to concussions, and that's good. That's fine. I'd rather be more cautious and more alert to these things than less. But at the same time, I don't think it's unbelievable that Kenny Pickett was feeling all right, went back in for a few more minutes, came to the sideline and said, you know what? Maybe I've got a little bit of a headache setting in, or, you know what? Maybe my vision is a little bit blurry or something. All these different things can take time to manifest when it is a head injury. So that part of it, to me, isn't, there's not a bunch of red flags there for me. But it is, obviously, you hope for Kenny it's as minor as these things can be. Because, again, I've never bought into that whole, it's just a little concussion. You either have a concussion or you don't. You're either pregnant or you're not. You can't be a little pregnant. Right. Hopefully for Kenny, though, it is something that he can be cleared and can continue because, that's kind of the number one thing we're hanging our hat on now for the rest of this season is the development of number 8.
No, it really is. Because, again, the biggest goal for this year was, beyond being competitive, was getting Kenny Pickett to become your franchise quarterback, and maybe not right away, but at least give him the foundation, starting place where he can come back next year and say, hey, I made these gains this year. I'm going to make these gains next year. And he has made gains. He's still, in this game, the Steelers threw 3 interceptions. A lot of people could point to that might be the biggest reason they lost the game. We could argue about the run defense and other things. We'll do that later with stars and skulls. But the key is that they turned the ball over, and he hadn't been turning the ball over, and that was a big reason why they were staying in games. Heck, they were in the Bengals game for most of the game because he wasn't turning the ball over and he was keeping drives alive. Mitch Trubisky did a better job keeping drives alive, less 3 and outs in this game. But of course, those turnovers proved crucial. I guess my other thing about Kenny Pickett is, for one, the Steelers aren't going to rush him back out there. They're going to take care of him. They're going to do what they have to do. But for another, I think that there's also the sign that's like, hey, you're going to have to learn to protect yourself out there. The Steelers need to invest in the offensive line to protect him. The blitz that caused this problem, it was an A-gap blitz where a guy came right up the middle. Mason Cole and Kevin Dotson both could have gotten him. Neither did. It was a miscommunication on their part, and that forced the pressure that got him out of the pocket. And then he got slammed down by Roquan Smith. The Steelers have to invest to get those guys, but also, there's plenty of times. And this was a noted thing about Kenny Pickett when he was at Pitt. He would, and this was part of his charisma too. He would put himself on the line. He would dive for the hits. He didn't slide as much. When his version of sliding was head first, he would kind of slide in there to get the ball as farthest as he can. The Steelers have to find a way to teach him, hey, we want that aggression. We want that hero mode that you can turn on to be a quarterback. That's why they drafted you. But you also have to learn to protect yourself better. And I think all of this is playing into lessons that they need to take in for Kenny Pickett and carry forward.
That's a great point by you. You got to at times protect yourself a little bit too, right? You think of was it the New Orleans game that I'm thinking of where the highlight of Kenny Pickett running down the field with Najee Harris trying to pick up a block? Was that the New Orleans game? It was a few weeks ago, but there's been a few of those. And you love to see that fire. You love to see that tenacity. You love to see that willingness for him to, whatever it takes mentality. But at the same time, you are the quarterback. We need you out there healthy for, 16, 17 games a season, plus hopefully postseason once this thing starts to roll around and you get some stuff corrected. Hopefully that is part of this learning process for Kenny too. Hey, we love the fire. We love the football guy mentality, right? But at the same time, don't run down the field 20, 30 yards with Najee Harris looking to pick up a block because we don't need you taking that contact. If there's nothing there, maybe don't try and spin out of this and keep the play alive. Maybe just go down and live to fight another day. That's all part of the learning process. And, maybe that, to use a Tomlinism here, that I know Alan Saunders used on the Locked On Steelers podcast that worked out well. You would rather say whoa than sick 'em, right? That Mike Tomlin always says. Maybe a little bit of that conversation with Kenny, like, hey, we love the tenacity, we love the passion and the fire, but just your health in that same vein has to be priority number one.
Absolutely. We'll talk more about that when we get for more information. We're going to try to get Dr. K back on here to talk concussion, talk just about Kenny Pickett and concerns that anyone might have. We'll do that maybe in the coming weeks to see how Kenny Pickett plays out and how long he is in the concussion protocol. Because remember, he's in the protocol. It doesn't mean he definitely has concussion. It just means there are symptoms and they have to keep watch. Last time he was in it, he got out of it pretty quickly. He was practicing by the middle of the week and he came back to play the next week. We'll see if it's the same thing this time around. But we got to get to our grades. We'll do that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about BetOnline. BetOnline is the number one place to go for all your betting stats and sports information. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NFL season that's getting closer and closer to the playoffs, but also NHL, college sports, and much, much more. BetOnline is your continued choice for all your betting stats and sports information, live betting, playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter, joined by Wes Uhler of Steeler Nation Radio. Wes, it's time for our grades segments. Now, of course, grades, we get into stars and skulls. We do them differently here. The quick rubric for everyone to look at. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening for the first time, you want to know how we do grades. We don't do it A, B, C, D. It's different. We do it with kind of like football helmet decals. Stars are good. Skulls are bad. If you had 1 star, you had a good day, good play with like a decent day. 2 stars, we had a great play with a pretty good day. 3 stars, elite performance. All this goes into your resume to contribute to an all-pro year. 1 skull means you had a bad day without any really redeeming moment for it. 2 skulls means you had a bad game as a whole. 3 skulls means you were all-time terrible. You should be benched. Let's get into the grades here, Wes. I'm going to start out with the good, because it's a little easier to do the good than the bad. And we're going to start with our 1 star. There were no 3 stars and there were no 2 stars in my grading rubric this week. Just didn't feel like anybody had that impactful of a performance. There were times that guys did, but then there were other times that they neutralized it. And there's a lot of people who I didn't even give grades to because I felt they fell into that neutral category. But there were people who I thought did enough to earn stars. I'll say Chris Wormley in my 1-star list because he did get a sack. Other guys, a lot of the secondary, because I felt like they did what they could when they had to. A lot of the problems on defense weren't involving them. Cam Sutton had a really good tackle. Minka Fitzpatrick had a heck of a hit on a 3rd down on Huntley, and that ended his day. Not that you're aiming for injury, but still it was a good hit. DeMonte KZ also had a really good open field tackle on Huntley that stopped a long run. Connor Heyward had another really big catch. Levi Wallace had a breakup in this game. TJ Watt gets back on the board with a sack. Pat Freiermuth had that nice touchdown catch and continues to be a threat when he's actually getting a chance to catch the ball. George Pickens, I thought, had some really nice receptions in this game. Also, the 1 offensive lineman that I went back and I gave, or the 2 offensive linemen, I gave credit for was the right side, James Daniels and Chukwuma Okorafor, for not great days, but they were the couple people who were moving people on at least what I saw from the Ravens defensive front. Wes, give me your thoughts on some of these guys that you saw there from the booth, because you were there, of course, doing the game for Steeler Nation Radio.
Oh, yes. I hope everybody heard my award-winning halftime report there. I tell you what. But yeah, Chris, I like Chris Wormley being I don't know if you do these in terms of like first name on the list or just kind of a random smattering, but I thought Chris Okay. I thought Chris Wormley, though, aptly here is the first one you listed. I thought he had himself quietly a nice game, and it was a real shame that he knee injury, I believe it was, that he picked up there and was unable to finish. But it's like every time he sees his ex across the line of scrimmage, Chris Wormley, he just puts in a performance against the Ravens every single time. It's like, all right, you guys traded me to a rival. You let me go to a rival. Don't worry, I'll make you regret that one. So I like the shout out for him, also for Cam Sutton as well too. I thought, listen, there weren't a lot of plays made in the air by the Ravens. We all knew what the game plan was going to be, and that was going to be to keep the ball on the ground. But I thought Cam Sutton, when they did look his way, made some nice plays. And then some of the offensive playmakers that you have in there as well too. Connor Heyward looks like it's really starting to come together for him. He could be a dude, Chris. And then all of a sudden, you got Freiermuth, you got Gentry, you got Connor Heyward. I mean, you got the Big Ten brethren of tight ends there, and they all have.
I never thought about that connection.
Penn State, Michigan State. They all have a different skill set and something different that they bring to the table. Connor Heyward. It's the game starting to slow down for him. I don't think he's hitting any type of rookie wall, obviously, because he wasn't used a ton early in the season. I like him being on there. Freiermuth as well, too. And George Pickens. I mean, the big catch down the field. Again, not targeted as much as we would like to see him, but when he was making plays. And then I'm with you. I think quietly, we've talked about some of the struggles of the Steelers' left side of the offensive line with Dotson and Dan Moore throughout the season. I think Chooks and James Daniels have done a pretty solid job. 1 star, I think, is apt. They're not playing at a Pro Bowl or an All-Pro level, but they've both been solid. And I think if we were kind of to grade their season to this point, I think we would have them with more good games than more down games. So I like that shout by you as well too. I think this is a pretty good list.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's go to the 1 skull list. There's lots of 2s and 3s this week. And I don't think we've had too many weeks where it was multiple 3s, but there were plenty of 1s. And if you don't see a person on this list, trust me, they're probably coming. I will say this. In retrospect, just looking at this list, I forgot to put Presley Harvin on the list for some bad punting. He'll be added a skull for this game. But the guys that I did not forget, Mason Cole, I gave him one skull because he was able to balance things at different times. But for the most of the game, he still wasn't efficient enough in the middle part of the field, and he was equally responsible as Kevin Dotson for letting the pass rusher get through that hurt Kenny Pickett. Zach Gentry had a big drop that I thought could have helped the Steelers. Granted, they ended up scoring on that drive, so it ended up being not as big of a deal, but still wanted more from him. I felt Terrell Edmonds could have been better, especially in run defense. There were times he looked a little bit late to come up and help, and that's where he's supposed to be on time. DeMarvin Leal didn't have a really good day, as did Isaiah Loudermilk, but I don't crush neither of them too much because they only were in there for about 10 snaps each, and it was, whatever. And then the other guys I gave skulls to, Alex Highsmith, Robert Spillane, just because they were part of the upfront crew that just didn't do enough. They weren't beaten. They weren't the worst of the guys who were getting beaten, and there were times I think Alex Highsmith was doing what he could, but there were just each of those guys, I think they were opportunities they had to make plays, and they didn't come through, and ultimately they hurt the Steelers.
Yeah, well said. And Mason Cole, I think rightfully so. Just some communication breakdown stuff that you alluded to earlier with him and Dotson. Gentry, could have had a big catch that would have probably picked up a first down and maybe changed some momentum there. I really like too, Chris, how you have Edmonds and DeMarvin Leal next to each other. And again, I know this is kind of, as you stated, just a random smattering here, but those two, I think some of the negative for those two can kind of be linked together because, we talk a lot about communication. That applies to your down linemen and your guys on the back end as well too, because if Terrell Edmonds, let's say, expects DeMarvin Leal to be in the B gap, but he's in the C gap instead, and Edmonds was supposed to be in the C gap, but now he sees DeMarvin Leal there, and he's got to readjust, and he's playing off of that there, and he's like, wait a second, Leal's not where he's supposed to be, so now I've got to make up for that. I do think if you go back and look, and I had a chance to do it a little bit last night, and I would like to more here as well too, and really kind of chart each play. But on that last Ravens drive in particular, CC, it seemed to me like with Leal, with Cam Heyward as well too, and with Edmonds, there was a lot of miscommunication between those three on who is supposed to fill which gap. All right, who's got the B gap? Who's got the C gap? Who's taken outside here? And a couple of those big Ravens runs down the stretch, I think you can directly attribute to that. Like I said, I looked at that last night briefly for a few minutes, or Sunday night, I should say, for a few minutes. I think my eyes on the rewatch said, yeah, there was clearly some issues there. I would like to go back and really break that down. But, you've got a rookie in DeMarvin Leal who's still learning and who's still trying to figure this thing out. Cam Heyward, I'd be interested to see. I don't know if he's maybe on your 2 or 3 skulls here, but I don't think he had his best day, and certainly that's a high standard. We all know how great Cam has been for so long. But those three, I thought, as the game wore down and the Ravens were really able to just out-physical the Steelers and just, hey, you guys know what's coming, you can't stop it. Between Leal, Heyward, and Edmonds there, because remember, they're moving Leal around a lot too.
Right, they are.
There was just some communication issues there where clearly, all right, you had 2 guys in one gap and nobody's here, or Leal goes one way and Edmonds clearly thought he was going to go the other way, and now they're scrambling to try and catch up. And that was something that was tough to see, and that they need to get cleaned up.
Absolutely do need to get it cleaned up, and we'll talk more about that because some of those guys that Wes mentioned are on my 2 skull and 3 skull list. We'll get to those guys in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. So don't go anywhere. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks, of course, is daily fantasy made easy. Instead of going up against millions of people and trying to pick a perfect roster, why not just pick a few players that you think you have a beat on for their fantasy today? And if all you have to do is just guess more or less on their Prize Picks stats, let's say, for example, if Prize Picks has a person for 40 yards, if you bet more, you get money. And when you bet like that on Prize Picks, you can get up to 10 times your money on any entry. And it's simple as that. Pick players, say more or less, and then just watch their games and watch yourself win money. You're not competing against others, just against Prize Picks itself. And it's not just the NFL. You can also do it with NBA, NHL, World Cup, college, it's everywhere. So go do Prize Picks right now by going to the Prize Picks app or to prizepicks.com. And first time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On at Prize Picks or on the Prize Picks app. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We are continuing our Week 14 grades of the Steelers' performance against the Ravens. We've already done our 1 stars and our 1 skulls. And as I said, there are no 2 stars and there are no 3 stars because it was that rough of a game for the Steelers. But let's get to the 2 skull guys, and they were some of the guys that you mentioned. Frankly, I put the entire Steelers defensive line outside of the 2 guys who were only in there for like 10 snaps on here. Cam Heyward, Larry Ogunjobi. I also there's more guys coming on the 3 skull list, trust me. But I also threw in Miles Jack, Devin Bush, Dan Moore Jr., and Kevin Dotson. I felt like the linebackers, this was a game where you're right, they could have communicated better. They could have been in their spots better. And there were games where they have been. I think there's been also a lot more of the run defensive problems that have happened with a lot of games. It's been more so the D lineman getting beaten up so much and the group wearing down. And it's like, it's excusable when you're on the field for 100 plays. Not that the Steelers would use it for an excuse, but to me as an analyst, I rationalize when I see that, and I'm like, man, I'm not coming after Cam Heyward because he was on the field for 100 snap in this game and then got tired. That's just not how I'm going to evaluate. But in this game, I felt like each of these guys needed to be better. This wasn't the worst game of any of their careers, but this was embarrassing. They know it, and that's why they were owning up to it in the locker room. Also threw Dan Moore Jr. and Kevin Dotson on this list.
Yeah, and you know what? They were, Chris. I mean, you heard a lot of, the Ravens were more physical than us today from guys in the locker room postgame, and that's not something you hear from the Steelers very often. That's not something that football players admit very often, even if they know that it was the case in the back of their mind. So I'm with you. Cam Heyward, listen, I mean, I don't need to hold anybody's hand on this one. He's been an incredible football player for over a decade. I think he's got a legitimate case to be a Hall of Famer one day. But he just didn't have a good game on Sunday. That's all right. It happens to everybody. Reggie White didn't have an A+ game every day, right? Aaron Donald might have an A+ game every day. He's pretty darn good. But Ray Lewis didn't have an A+ game every time he took the field. Troy Polamalu didn't have an A+ game every time he took the field. It happens, and I think there was a little bit of a snowball effect there too, right? Where look at all those guys that you just had up on the screen. Devin Bush, Miles Jack, Larry O, Cam Heyward, where when one of them is not playing well, but the other ones are, that's one thing, right? You can kind of raise the tide of those ships. But when you're all struggling, it looks like it did on Sunday. And they all did not have their best game at the same time. And for Miles Jack and Devin Bush too, Chris, I know there were so many people on Twitter Sunday evening and into Monday just dumping on Miles Jack, particularly dumping on Devin Bush. And I get it. You've been waiting to do that all season because you hate Devin Bush and he's a bust. I get it. But he hasn't been that bad all season. Right?
No, he's not. He's actually been pretty good on a lot of games.
And that's what I think makes Sunday even more frustrating, is that Devin Bush and Miles Jack have actually been a pretty solid tandem this season. Listen, I'm not saying that they're Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith, all right? I'm not saying that they're Patrick Willis and Navarro Bowman, right? No. They're not James Ferrier and Larry Foote out there. But they have been a solid tandem this entire season. They were not on Sunday. So when you combine those struggles with Cam Heyward and Larry O and DeMarvin Leal and some communication breakdowns there, that's how you get an opponent who ends up running for over 200 yards against you and seemingly snatching your soul in the process.
No, I agree. And that's part of why I put them there. So there's that. And we kind of already went over the offensive line as far as, what our expectations are there. Dan Moore Jr., Kevin Dotson, both of them needed to be better. And there were moments where each of them had a good block here or there. That's why I spared them the 3 skull look here, but it was still pretty bad from their end. So there you have it. There's our 2 skull guys. Now it's time for our 3 skull guys. We have 3 guys here.
Dun, dun, dun.
As usual, I'm going to let Wes try to guess who on my last category. Give me there are 3 players here. Let's see if we get them all.
Okay, I know Mitch Trubisky has to be one. Because he hasn't popped up on any of these yet, and so he's certainly got to be one. I'm going to go with Presley Harvin, Mitch, Presley, and who haven't you mentioned so far? Najee Harris?
No, I actually gave Najee a neutral grade.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say I would have been surprised if he was 3 stars.
But yeah,
I'm missing an obvious one here.
So it's actually a hint that I did give you because earlier when I said that I put the entire defensive line there, and then the entire defensive line.
Oh wait, hold on, I gotta guess. Mitch Trubisky, Presley Harvin, Tyson Alualu.
2/3, but Travius Adams was the third there. As I said before, I retroactively should have put Presley Harvin on the 1 skull list. It's hard for me to put too many skulls on special teamers when they get one chance to play in a game. But definitely putting these guys here. And the reason that they have the 3 skull list is because these guys didn't have enough redeeming moments to make up for their follies, and they were on the field enough. So Alualu and Adams, they were both just getting eaten up all game long. And another thing about this, Tyler Linderbaum, the Iowa center who I previewed a lot on this show, leading into this as a guy the Steelers should look at in the first round. And again, not that they shouldn't have picked Kenny Pickett because he's Kenny Pickett and there's a lot of hope that he's going to be the next guy. But you're seeing why I think a lot of people were really excited to see him play this year. He even was giving hard times to Cam Heyward. So, kudos again to the Ravens offensive line for how they played.
Yeah.
But
they did. They played well, and despite some losses too. I mean, Zeitler wasn't there. Ronnie Stanley was a question heading into the game, so he clearly wasn't 100%. But yeah, they did their job for sure.
Absolutely. But like I said, Alualu and Adams, the veterans who were playing more in this game, they needed to be better. They weren't. That's why they got 3 skulls, because they also didn't really have their redeeming moments. And then the other guy, I struggle with this for a bit, though, with Mitch Trubisky, because he did throw 2 touchdowns. He had that first drive and that last drive. But when I just go back and I look at the opportunity, and it was when I did a film review, and it wasn't just the interceptions, there were other missed opportunities, but on those interceptions, there was a very available option that just made so much more sense on all 3 of those plays. And as the veteran, and look, I get wanting to be aggressive, but when you're being aggressive, you also have to come prepared to, with your studies to rely on that aggression and to do all the things leading up to that so that you make your shot count. If Mitch Trubisky, he admitted on the deep ball to Deontay Johnson, they got intercepted. He admitted after the game he didn't look off the safety, and that later in the game when they called the same play, he did look off the safety because he remembered it from that moment. If he makes that play and at least looks off the safety before throwing that pass, maybe Deontay Johnson catches a touchdown. Maybe it's just an incomplete pass. But either way, they probably still result with points on that drive because they were in plus territory. Same thing goes for the other 2 passes there. And I look at this situation and I say, man, that was a time where you could have been the hero just by doing the bare minimum of not turning the ball over and putting more than 16 points on the board.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for Mitch. It is. I'm
not begrudging that at all.
I think it's okay to acknowledge that. Like, he gets his chance to go back out there, and for the 3.5 games that he played, the big knock on him was he's way too conservative. Mm-hmm. And so he's probably thinking, all right, I'm going to go out here, I'm going to make some plays, I'm going to show everybody that I can do this. I think there was maybe a little too much, he's maybe a little too gung-ho when he first got in there. As you mentioned, though, too, Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen, go back and watch those 2 interceptions. They were poor decisions from Mitch Trubisky, but they also baited him beautifully.
They did. They set it up. They set it up very well. And Roquan Smith showed that's why they traded to get him.
Bro, go back and watch that Roquan Smith interception. There's maybe 2 or 3 linebackers in the NFL that can pull that off.
No, I agree.
He's showing a man look the whole way. He actually steps with his man for the first 2 steps and then cuts back to the center of the field to completely throw Mitch Trubisky off there when he was in zone, but to make the read look like he was in man. It's well done. I mean, it is. It's, those guys are highly compensated. Those guys are first-round picks. Those guys are millionaires as well, too, for a reason. They're allowed to make plays. But it was the cumulative effect for Mitch Trubisky. Just too many turnovers. Chris, this is something that we talked about a little bit, when you joined Moats and I on Steelers Nation Radio. The Steelers right now, make no mistake about it, like they're not a team that can beat you in multiple ways.
No, they have a very slim path to victory.
They have a very slim margin for error. They have a very clear, concise blueprint for how they have to win games. They have to take care of the football. They have to run the ball successfully. They have to stop the run. They need their defense to be the one making splash plays. They need to be +1 or +2 in the turnover category. And you need some help from your special teams as well, too.
Yep.
You didn't really get any of those things. You didn't run the ball great. Not horrible, but you didn't run the ball great. You lost the turnover battle. Your defense didn't force any, and your special teams, you got a field goal blocked out there. So, and the 17-yard punt by Presley Harvin, which you've got to mention with that too. Bad snap there on the long snap that forced Presley off his mark. That I think certainly had something to do with that as well too. It's honestly, when you look at it through that scope, I think it's wild that they only lost that game by 2 points,
Mm-hmm.
But they just, and they have a clear-cut, concise way that they have to play to win games. And I think at the top of that list is taking care of the football and not turning it over. And so, while it's a tough spot for Mitch Trubisky, it's also, we all know what the onus is for this offense. Don't kill yourselves. Take advantage when the defense puts you in opportune situations. And as much as we talk about and would like this team to finish in the end zone as opposed to through the uprights more often, you still need those threes instead of nothing at all, instead of turnovers.
Right, exactly.
That's the blueprint. That's the formula. It's not a secret. Everybody knows that that's how this team is constructed right now, and they weren't able to execute that on Sunday.
I agree. It's all about execution. Again, I thought the game plan was there, especially offensively. You had your opportunities.
A lot of people are picking this time, too, to, kind of like I said with the people who have just had their Devin Bush hate tweets in their drafts and are firing them off finally. It's like the same people with Mike Tomlin, right?
Yeah.
The same people who were praising Mike Tomlin. Well, look what these teams done over the last 4 weeks. They won 3 of 4 games post-bye. They're looking much better. Mike Tomlin he never loses a team. Now the other side of that is, oh my goodness, you can't go out there and lose to a third-string quarterback.
Right.
Like that's the only storyline that transpired in the game. I'm with you. I don't think the coaching was perfect either, but I don't think that's the reason they lost. They lost because they didn't execute on both sides of the football and on special teams.
No, I agree with that. Like one of the coaching adjustments I think should have been made on that last drive when you knew the Ravens had to run the ball, load the box. Say, what, third string quarterback, you're going to have to beat Minkah Fitzpatrick.
Make the play to beat us, right? Yeah.
Right, make the play to beat us. We're going to challenge you, and they didn't challenge them enough. They had some 2 deep safety looks on there. I felt like that was the biggest coaching malfeasance in the game. But again, there's a lot of other points where if field goes in blocked, if any one of those 3 interceptions ain't thrown, they probably win this game.
You hit an extra field goal or 2, and everyone's like, "Wow, can't believe you won!" I mean, the Ravens were able to run the football, and you turned it over, and you had some negatives on special teams, and Kenny Pickett got hurt in the first quarter, and you were still able to win that game. That's the fine margins of the National Football League. That's why it's the ultimate parity league, and that's why almost all these games, week in and week out, are one-possession games.
I agree entirely. Wes, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yes, sir. Steelers Nation Radio. I host the Steelers Blitz with Arthur Moats at noon. You can listen to us on Steelers.com, Steelers app, iHeart.com, iHeart app. You can also just Steelers Blitz wherever you get your podcasts. And speaking of podcasts, is Chris jokes, but he is correct. I do all the WVU podcasts. Ears and Beers, more basketball-centric. In the Gun, more football-centric. So for my fellow tortured Mountaineer souls, that's where you can find me.
Absolutely. Do check him out. Wes Uhler is the man. Thanks so much for joining us here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover Pitt athletics. They got an amazing Final Four volleyball team right now that's going to Omaha, Nebraska. That's going to be really fun to watch. We'll see how they do. Also, Pitt's bowl game coming up and Pitt basketball trying to rebound this season. We'll have all there at the Post-Gazette. But, of course, you can find this show, Locked On Steelers, here every day, Monday through Friday, breaking things down on your Pittsburgh Steelers on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you see this video on YouTube, like the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. And leave us a 5-star rating with a positive comment on Apple Podcasts to get a shout out at the end of the show. Thanks again. Back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.